Hey everyone, welcome to the March 30th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragon, and I'll be joined in just a moment by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're taking a look at last weekend's racing, an international version of the show, as we talk about some races from Dubai, that Dubai World Cup card, the feature race, which was won by Mystic Guide. We'll mention a few of the races on that card, though, because the Americans had a little bit of success, and there was also some interesting turf racing and a 3-year-old that might be coming over for the Kentucky Derby, so we'll mention all three of those races. Then we'll move on to the bulk of the U.S. action, which took place at Gulfstream Park. The Florida Derby was the feature race there on Saturday, but they had a whole slew of stakes races, some of which we previewed on the TimeformUS forecast last week, so I'll recap some of those opinions, talk about some horses that put in notable performances, and dissect that last 3-year-old prep for the Kentucky Derby down at Gulfstream Park. There was also a prep for the Derby at Turfway Park, the Jeff Ruby Stakes. We'll discuss that race, and whether or not it's going to have any implications on the Kentucky Derby about 5 weeks from now. Then we'll finish things up out west at Santa Anita, where they just had a little bit of stakes racing, but there were also some very intriguing Allowance and Maiden winners that caught the eye last weekend. So Craig, international set of races this week, and we're going to start things off with those Dubai races, and the Americans put up a pretty good showing, topped by that performance from Mystic Guide in the Dubai World Cup.
Yeah, that was a very nice performance. I can't say that I don't think we didn't expect it. He looked like he was probably the best dirt horse going into the race that actually showed up. I mean, maybe you could argue for Charlatan before the race, but after it, I can't see it. Mystic Guide loved the distance. He handled the surface well. Timeform rated him a 129, which is definitely a really solid grade 1 type figure. And, you know, for those that use our product, that transfers really nicely to our speed figures. They're on the same scale. So just one of the best performances I think we've seen this year.
Yeah, you know that I've been a big fan of this horse all along. It's nice to see him finally get that grade 1 victory, doing it overseas, albeit. But I would imagine once he comes back to the United States, he's going to be in the conversation as one of the top handicap horses out there. We're probably not going to see him for a few months because typically horses do get a bit of a break after Dubai. And I saw Mike Stidham saying they're not going to look to target a race until the summer, like probably the Whitney or the Pacific Classic. And then I would imagine they'd only run him once or twice more before the Breeders' Cup. So unfortunately, when these horses go over to Dubai, we don't get to see them that much, but I thought he ran very well, and he could have a very nice 4-year-old season in those top races as long as he comes back in good form. And I thought it was a credit to the horse that he was able to handle some pretty unnerving circumstances before the race, because you had that weird situation where 2 horses got loose on the racetrack. I mean, one ran off, then another broke through the gate, and just a real delay to the start. Some horses got very upset prior to the race, including Mystic Guide, but he was able to settle down just enough to put forth the top performance. So very interested to see what he does in the future.
Yeah, and I did think Maggie Wolfendale of Naira put out some good information, and just something to keep in mind when you see things like that. She tweeted out right away that that's how Mystic Guide normally is before races. So I didn't think it was a lot of concern. There seemed to be some people that were worried about it, but it does pay to kind of know how horses act normally and see if there's a difference. And in his case, it really wasn't.
Yeah, it was kind of funny to watch before the race. He was a mess going to the gate, kind of just jumping up and down on his toes, sweating a little bit. And then once those horses started to break loose, he calmed down and everybody else got upset. So I think that actually worked out okay for him because he got his nerves out before all of those antics by some of his rivals. Couple other races to discuss from that Dubai World Cup card at Meydan. On the turf, the star attraction was Mishrif, who won the Dubai Shima Classic, going the 1.5 mile distance. Proved that he could go that far against some top company, because those 2 horses that he was beating from Japan, including the runner-up Chronogenesis, they're pretty good, and they put forth top efforts, and Mishrif was just able to get the better of them, and he's now a dual surface Group 1 winner this year. That's something you don't often see.
Yeah, this was quite impressive, I thought. He actually didn't get bet as hard as I thought he would. He wound up with a 128 Timeform rating for the race, so just a tick below Mystic Guide. I think his figure when he won the Saudi Cup on dirt was north of 130, so really solid horse, obviously. It's not often you see a horse that's able to handle 1.1 miles on dirt, stretch out in his next start to 1.5 miles on turf, so just really impressive. I doubt we'll see that again anytime soon. So it's a pretty special horse for my take.
Yeah, and John Gosden won those two big turf races on Saturday night in Dubai, with Lord North also taking the Dubai turf, going a mile and an eighth. And it seems like he has plenty of options for where these horses can go in the future, because both of those runners seem very versatile. Mishriff with regard to the surface and Lord North with regard to the distance. So whether they're turning back to a mile with Lord North or going 10 furlongs or 12 with Mishriff, it seems like they could really take on some of the biggest prizes in Europe later this year. One of the races that we want to discuss from last Saturday in Dubai was the UAE Derby, just a Group 2 event, but it is offering 100 Kentucky Derby qualifying points to the winner of this race, which was Rebels Romance for Godolphin. And this horse has got a lot of U.S. racing fans talking based on the impressive nature of the performance and what his Derby prospects could potentially be if they decide to come over for this race, because obviously the UAE Derby is run on dirt at 1 mile and 3/16, just a little bit shorter than the 1.25 mile distance of the Derby. So he's answered the stamina question. I just think we're not really sure about the quality of the field that he was beating.
Yeah, no thanks for me. I actually usually try to make speed figures for these races. It's something I'll probably tackle this week to see how he stacks up. But he got a 118 time form rating. But one thing to keep in mind is for younger horses, 2 and 3 year olds, time form uses a weight for age adjustment. So that 118 does not compare to like the 118 that we've seen Essential Quality run, for example. It will be lower when he shows up in our PPs at TimeformUS, because we've removed that weight for age portion, which for me means I think he would probably be in the low hundreds. I didn't look up the table, but I think this time of year that's where it's at. So just based on that alone, he would have a long way to go. Now maybe that'll change if I do speed figures, and maybe it'll turn up faster than I thought. But just looking at the times, I don't think so. I've seen enough of these horses ship over from Dubai. He's not for me in the Derby, barring something crazy happening between now and then.
Yeah, I know U.S. racing fans sometimes get taken by the latest shiny object on the Derby trail, and I suppose it's this horse this week, but, I mean, he still has a lot to prove. We haven't seen this UAE Derby to the Kentucky Derby move work really ever, and I didn't get the sense that this was a top group of 3-year-olds in Dubai this year, and the fact that he beat some mediocre horses impressively, I'm just not sure it means that much. I mean, look, he did run well within the context of the race, because he was about third to last heading around the first turn, and he made a move from far back in the pack to get up and win by nearly 6 lengths, and that's not something you often see in Dubai, coming from that far back. But he did do it while racing outside in the clear. He was never really on the kickback, and I think that's important to note at Meydan, because coming from off the pace, you do kind of have to do it out in the clear. So I wouldn't get too caught up in the fact that he lost ground and was about 5 wide around both turns, because I think that's almost more beneficial than saving ground over that dirt track when you're trying to come from off the pace. So he ran fine. I'm just not viewing him as a top horse for the U.S. Classics right now.
Yeah, that's a good point about the kickback. I think that is in large part the big reason why speed horses do so well there, more than it's a biased track. I mean, it's biased in the fact that the kickback harms closers, but not so much that like the rail is the best place to be.
All right, let's head back over to the United States, down to Florida, and talk about those races from Gulfstream Park last Saturday, leading off with that Florida Derby, the final prep at Gulfstream for the Kentucky Derby. And this was supposed to be the coronation for Greatest Honor as one of the favorites for that Kentucky Derby, but couldn't quite get it done, as his arch nemesis, Known Agenda, now has a 2-0 record against Greatest Honor. He's beaten him in both meetings, and he did so pretty decisively here, as Todd Pletcher has been able to get this horse back on track since the addition of blinkers.
Yeah, this was a really strong effort from him. Great call by you on the forecast. I know neither one of us were particularly high on Greatest Honor coming in. And while you said he didn't quite get it done, I mean, he wasn't even particularly close. I didn't think he ran well at all. The winner got a 113 TimeformUS speed figure, Known Agenda. So nice progression for him. Other than that Tampa effort, he just keeps getting better every time. He's proven distance, doesn't seem to be any issue at all. It sure looks like 1.25 miles would be fine. That said, he does still have to find a few lengths to catch up to his peers, and we're not going to know till the Derby what he's doing, because I think it's still 5 weeks away. So, little ways to go, little ground to make up, but he is certainly moving in the right direction. I was also impressed with the runner-up, Soup and Sandwich. It was a big effort from him, first time against top competition like this. He was battling on a pretty quick pace early. The race slowed down, but he easily held off Greatest Honor for second. So as a lately raced horse, he's one I think has plenty potential as well.
Yeah, I liked this effort from Moan Agenda. I thought that he did exactly what he was supposed to do here, ran the kind of professional race that we hadn't seen from him in his prior starts against graded stakes company. Irad Ortiz pretty much kept after him the entire way, and this horse stayed in the bridle, whereas sometimes he'd sulk before, and he was able to make the move at the right time coming around the far turn and get the jump on his main rival, and he finished off this race like at a distance is going to be no problem for him. He reminds me a lot of Vino Rosso for the same connections, and no surprise, they're both sons of Curland, but Vino Rosso had that same tendency to sometimes disengage in his races early in his career, and eventually Todd Pletcher figured him out. It seems like he's done the same with No Agenda a little bit earlier in his career, and hopefully he can hold it together for the Kentucky Derby, because this was a nice effort going a mile and an eighth. Like you said, though, he's going to have to run faster if he's going to be competitive against some 3-year-olds from other circuits, because I think something that we've been seeing all winter down at Gulfstream is that this Florida-based group of 3-year-olds is just kind of slow. And Greatest Honor, it turns out that those slow speed figures, or moderate to slow speed figures that he got in his 2 prior graded stakes wins out there, I mean, they're pretty legitimate, because he actually regressed a little bit here. And I will admit he didn't get the best trip for him. Jose Ortiz elected to try to save ground, something that he did last time, the Fountain of Youth, that Greatest Honor seemed to detest. And he did it again here, trying to make a move up the inside into kickback, and Greatest Honor didn't seem to respond to that. I also think the pace of this race didn't really work in Greatest Honor's favor, because while it was a little more contested than we expected in the opening quarter mile, you can see in the TimeformUS pace figures for this race, they really slowed it down on the backstretch, and Greatest Honor actually got caught making an unintended premature move up into the race once they straightened out for the backstretch run, and had to steady a little bit and lose some momentum there. So I don't think that it was the ideal trip for a deep closer like him, but in the Kentucky Derby, he's not going to necessarily be able to get that outside run. He's got to learn how to run through kickback and deal with traffic. So I'm a little bit down on Greatest Honor heading on to the Kentucky Derby, and I know some people are going to stay on his bandwagon, but for me, at a relatively short price, he's a tough horse to like based on the speed figures that he's posted up until now.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the one thing you can say for him is he'll be coming at the end. I think that's pretty clear. And I'm with you. He probably wants a clear trip more than sitting in behind. But clear trips mean you're losing ground when you're a closer. So it's kind of 6 in one, half dozen in the other. You take some and you give some. So it would be better if he could learn to take a little bit of that kickback, because right now he's just not going to be able to get it done with that style.
Yeah, and I agree that Soup and Sandwich ran well. I know you mentioned his performance. He was a horse who seemed to benefit from that moderation of the pace on the backstretch. Nova Rags as well, who was 4th in this race. But Soup and Sandwich did still finish well clear of the other speeds in here. So it seems like he has a nice future. I just wonder if going forward to the Kentucky Derby is going to be a little too much too soon for a horse that was just making his 3rd career start, had seemed pretty green up until this race. I feel like maybe they should take a more conservative approach with him, but I know the allure of the Derby can be pretty tempting at times.
Yeah, I agree with you. While I was impressed with his performance, I wouldn't in any way, shape, or form consider him a true contender in the Kentucky Derby. I'd rather see him take some more time, get a little more seasoning before taking on the big boys, because he ran a 112, which is fine, but with his running style up near the front, I don't. It would be quite a leap to take on in the first Saturday in May.
Now, as for the Florida-based 3-year-old fillies marching forth towards the Kentucky Oaks, well, if the Colts are a little slow, the fillies are really slow, because we saw an upset winner of the Devona Dale, the local prep for the Gulfstream Park Oaks, and the winner of that race didn't come back. We had some also-rans from there who dominated this field. Crazy Beautiful got the job done for Ken McPeak, and I mean, don't get me wrong, she had shown some ability as a 2-year-old, but her performance here, I guess it was fine relative to her competition, but in the grand scheme of things, horses need to be running a lot faster than this to win the Kentucky Oaks, at least based on history.
Yeah, this was an ugly race going in. I think I even used the words "it stinks" beforehand, and absolutely nothing I saw on the track changed my mind on Saturday. The winner, Crazy Beautiful, only got a 99 TimeformUS speed figure. She had previously run as high as 102, so she hasn't really progressed. And something I found interesting, we put out that spreadsheet with all the Derby points races and Oaks point races. was I did the averages that these horses ran as 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. And the males, you could see progression where they went from, I think it was like 108 average as 2-year-olds to 112 as 3-year-olds. And that's a fairly normal progression, usually about a point to a point and a half a month. But the fillies have actually regressed, whereas they were faster as 2-year-olds. Now, I understand the better horses from the crop haven't really shown up, or when they did, they didn't run particularly well. So that's part of it, but it's still just a really seems like an odd outlier that the fillies just aren't going anywhere. It's almost like they're running in place, and I'm just still waiting for somebody to have a breakout race, because I can't believe any of the performances we've seen so far, including the ones at the fairgrounds last week, are the kind of efforts it's going to take to win the Oaks. Now, I mean, if we see more of the same in the next week or two at Aqueduct and Santa Anita and Keeneland and Oaklawn, then maybe I'd change my mind. But I still have to think there's a breakout performance or two coming from the remaining big prep races.
Yeah, I have to think it's just a little bit of a statistical anomaly that these horses haven't been able to run the speed figures that you would expect from horses that are maturing as 3-year-olds. I mean, it's not like there are really fast horses that have been winning maiden and allowance races out there that have just been skipping the stakes races. I mean, if there are, we haven't certainly caught them and talked about them on this Pacecast. It just seems like overall a kind of a slow crop. I mean, the horses that should be running in these graded stakes races, I guess, are running in the graded stakes races. They're just not that fast. So we'll see if some of those horses that compete in the upcoming prep races are able to do a little bit better. I have to think they'll be able to, because it doesn't take a Herculean effort to be able to run that much faster than the 99 the Crazy Beautiful got here. But still, it's a little disappointing, this crop of 3-year-olds that's heading forth towards the Kentucky Oaks. And I don't have a whole lot to say about the others in this race. I mean, Milfoil did run better than she did last time in the Devona Dale when she had a bit of a trip, but it turns out that she's just not that good, and Crazy Beautiful is simply a better horse than her right now. So hopefully there are some better 3-year-old fillies out there.
I do want to mention one thing, and I'm not sure what order you had us planned going in, so I'm going to throw a little monkey wrench at you and mention that the concern with me would be that both these races were for lightly raced 3-year-olds, and it's possible, I use projections to make speed figures, and I kind of guess what I think they're going to run and compare it to what they did run. And when you're only doing 3-year-olds, the thing is, maybe if they both improve 10 points, that's something that might skip by me. But in this case, we had older horses run on the dirt. Eye of the Jedi ran earlier on the card, so if you don't mind, we'll move on to that one. And he actually ran a 122 TimeformUS speed figure. He ran significantly faster than Known Agenda did. There's nothing to me that suggests the track got faster or slower throughout the day or anything like that. So I just thought that race was a really good benchmark. And looking at the past performances, I mean, the argument could easily be made that where did the 122 come from Eye of the Jedi? So, you could argue that one should be lower, which would make the 3-year-olds even slower. I think the figures are pretty solid from this day, but I feel a lot more comfortable about them because of this older horse race.
Yeah, the thing about that Ghost Zapper stakes, which Eye of the Jedi won, is that there were some pretty significant gaps between the horses at the wire. I mean, Eye of the Jedi won by 5.5 lengths over Last Judgment, who's a fast horse in his own right. Then there was a gap back to Superfecto, a huge gap back to the 4th horse, Warstopper, who was beaten 18 lengths by the winner. And when you see those big gaps between runners, that often is an indicator that it was a pretty fast race by the winner, Eye of the Jedi. So I'm not that surprised that he got what I assume is a career best speed figure for him, because he also got a perfect setup in terms of the pace. Last Judgment was the pace setter here, and he got pressed all the way by Superfecto on the front end. All those TimeformUS pace figures are color-coded in red, and Eye of the Jedi just sat the perfect trip in behind them, made that move at the quarter pole, and was able to sail clear at the end. There really wasn't another closer in this race that was there to take advantage of that quick pace up front, so it kind of does make sense that he was able to win off by that kind of margin given the setup. And I mean, nothing against Eye of a Jedi. He's been a good horse for a long time, just often running those TimeformUS speed figures in the mid-1 teens. But once he gets the kind of setup that he got here, I don't think it's a big surprise that he was able to take that step forward.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention, and it's probably a good time since we're still talking about the dirt races, is TimeformUS, we have this day coded in solid blue, indicating that closers did much better than would normally be expected. I don't know if I'd call this card speed bias, though. Even despite our blue rating, it's just an algorithm. Looks at the races. It looks at, for example, we had 2 9 furlong races. It kind of projects how often speed horses should win. Does that for all the dirt races on the card. And in this case, no speed horses were able to win, and all the winners came from the back or at worst mid-pack. So that's where the blue came from. But as I look at the other finishers in the races, I don't think speed was so much a disadvantage as that a couple of them, like Last Judgment, got caught up in speed duels, still hanging on for second. Race like the Florida Derby, we had speed horses that probably just weren't good enough to win. So not sure how you think about that, but it's just a case where I think you want to analyze the charts and really give the races a deep look and not just assume because we have it coded in blue that it favored closers, because basically I think it was a pretty fair racetrack.
I completely agree with you. And through some conversations with you, I have an idea of how that algorithm works. And I know it takes price into account a little bit. And we did have some shorter priced speed horses losing this day. But I agree with you. I mean, Last Judgment getting caught up in that fast pace. I mean, the favorite in the Gulfstream Park Oaks was Cone Lima, who it just turns out is not that good on the dirt. So, I mean, there were some vulnerable short prices that were speeds that I don't think either of us are surprised didn't run that well. Moving on to some of the turf action at Gulfstream Park on Saturday, beginning with one of the top speed figures we saw in the United States last week, which was turned in by the winner of the Grade 2 Pan American. That was Churn and Burn for Ian Wilkes, and this horse just seems like he's been totally reborn since Ian Wilkes stretched him out to these marathon distances on the turf. He's got improved early speed, and he's able to carry at a distance, and I know that some might say that this turf course was carrying along speed all day on Saturday, but I was still pretty impressed by this horse's performance.
Yeah, I was as well. He got a 124 Timeform US speed figure. I was impressed by your selection of him as well. Despite his lowish looking speed figures, it played out exactly as you said. You predicted he would run better at this longer distance. He got an easy lead. And while I do agree the Gulfstream turf course is definitely more speed favoring than some others that we see throughout the East Coast especially, I don't think it was a given that every speed horse was going to win. We saw some turf races where speed wasn't able to hang on, and with Gulfstream you always have to consider, I think they used 3 different rail settings on Saturday, a bunch of different run-ups, so you have to do your homework on these and see what happened. But I'm not going to knock this performance down too much just because he went wire to wire. Speed is always dangerous, especially at this 1.5 mile distance when you can just run good steady fractions like Churn and Burn did. And he looks like a horse that's going to be pretty dangerous to me going forward. I mean, he beat some solid campaigners and horses like Cross Border, who was coming out of a third in the Pegasus, Sagler's Joy, who's always there at the end. He must be, I have to bring him up, he must just be a pain in the butt to ride, because I just don't know what you're supposed to do with him. Once again, this time Jose Ortiz tried the early middle move, and he always has some run. He just never seems to be able to finish it. You have to time it perfectly, and it's almost like throwing darts and hoping you hit the bullseye, I think, with him. But yeah, I don't want to knock Churn and Burn whatsoever. It was a big effort, and I don't see why he couldn't repeat this again if he stays at these longer distances.
Yeah, the thing that I really liked about this performance from Churn and Burn is that Julien Leparoux was not afraid to send this horse for home a little bit early, coming basically past the half-mile pole. I mean, Sadler's Joy tried to make an earlier move under Jose Ortiz around the far turn, but that was when Julien really pushed the button on Churn and Burn. He threw in that 23-2 penultimate quarter mile before coming home the last quarter into the same 23-2, so a final half mile in 46-4. And I know the turf course was very firm at Gulfstream Park on Saturday, but those are running the fastest final 2 quarters of the race at the very end. And I just thought it was a really nice performance from this horse. Again, there's a question about what was behind him a little bit, because Moon Over Miami, who was second, he's another up-and-coming horse that just turned 4. So I think we have to wait and see if he's really going to be a major player in this division. And you could say that those horses like Cross Border and Sadler's Joy, who are a little bit older, maybe their form is a little bit on the downswing. That said, I still feel like Churn and Burn is an exciting horse moving forward, and I would imagine they'll look at some of those longer races at Keeneland, like the, I forget if it's the Elkhorn or the Sycamore, one of those two, but maybe after that they'll look at some races in New York, because I think this is a horse that I'd like to see in some Grade 1 races down the line.
Yeah, I mean, he ran a 124. This was a grade two. It's a solid grade two figure. And I mean, he won easily. So on turf, they're not trying to win by 8 lengths out there. It's trying to time it to get your best run at the end. So I wouldn't be surprised if this horse could run a little bit faster.
And I know you mentioned it, but I will also give both of us a little pat on the back for our performance on the TimeformUS forecast last week. I think we talked about 6 races, and between the two of us, we had the winners of all of them, even agreeing in some of those races, basically sweeping that pick 5 at Gulfstream. So I'm not sure we'll ever top that performance, or at least in the coming few weeks, because that was pretty good for us. But you had a very nice selection in the next race we're going to talk about, staying on the turf with the Grade 3 Orchid for the fillies and mares, as Warlike Goddess got the job done at 5-1 over the heavy favorite Always Shopping. And this winner was just much the best. I know she only won by a nose, but the horse who was second here, Always Shopping, she got to the front in mid-stretch, looked like she was on her way to victory, really had no excuse, and Warlike Goddess just came and got her from the back of the pack. We didn't see too many horses coming from that far back to be successful on the turf at Gulfstream on Saturday, but she was very impressive in victory.
Yeah, that was quite the finishing kick she put on. And I will say on the forecast, this was strictly a speed figure play. I'm a guy who I make speed figures, and for some reason people seem to think, a few people seem to think that means you always bet the fastest speed figure. But as we all know, if you play this game long enough, that's a sure road to losing. But sometimes when the speed figures give you a price, you just have to take it. And in this case, I thought she was every good as Always Shopping based on the speed figures. I didn't like her last trip when she earned a 116. So I'm not saying she was a standout, but I just thought she was a really good bet in here. And it turned out she backed up that speed figure from the last time. She ran a 118 in here, which is the same as Always Shopping got, just beating her nose. No surprise there. But it was just a point where I think we knew what Always Shopping was. She was a horse who's running in the upper teens, and it was a matter if you thought Warlike Goddess could beat her or not. We also talked about the horse Sorrel, who came in third. She ran a 114, but she easily could have been up there as well. Now, she got bet a little bit heavier, but Always Shopping was just a horse I thought was worth taking a shot against. She ran fine. She just got beat by a horse who was able to outkick her.
And I think the cool thing about Warlike Goddess is that she's a graded stakes winner going 1 3/8, what's considered a marathon distance in this country, in just her 4th career start. We don't often see horses that are this lightly raced excelling in marathons. Typically, you get these horses some experience over conventional route distances before you stretch them out to these longer trips. But Bill Mott was pretty bullish, just putting her right in these longer races basically from the start of her career, and she's responded very well to it. I mean, she's got a stamina-laden pedigree, being by English Channel, the Breeders' Cup Turf winner out of the Epsom Derby, a mare by an Epsom Derby winner in North Light. So she's bred to go this distance, and it seems like she wants every bit of that 1 3/8 and potentially even farther in the future. I thought Julien Leparoux gave her a great ride. I mean, nice to see the versatility that he showed riding both this winner from off the pace as well as Turden Burn all the way on the lead in the Pan American. So a good day for him, and a great Gulfstream Park meet for Bill Mott, who had a bunch of winners down there. Some really nice horses in his barn coming out of that meet that I'm sure he's going to ship up back to New York. So just an exciting group of horses moving forward into the springtime for that barn.
Yeah, and just for you, I have to mention one of the keys too. She was able to get away from that monster Antoinette.
Another nice horse for the Bill Mott barn with a different kind of running style. Perhaps not one that's garnered too much of my respect, but yeah, getting away from her I'm sure helped, and not having me have an opinion about Antoinette in this race I'm sure also helped.
Oh, I'm just kidding. I don't think Antoinette's any. She's a very good filly, obviously, but I was just making a joke there. She's one who I still think needs things to go her way to win.
There was some other stakes action on the turf on Saturday at Gulfstream Park. We're just going to talk about 2 more of the races, though, that achieved notable speed figures. One of those was the Grade 3 Appleton going 1 mile, and that was won off the layoff by Gray's Fable, who was a bit of a price in this race. This is a horse who had never really run this kind of performance before, competing mostly in optional claiming and allowance company, but we saw him show an affinity for the Gulfstream Park turf course last year, and speed was dangerous on Saturday, and he had speed and just was able to wire this field on the front end.
Yeah, he was a horse who was really coming to his own at the end of last year at Woodbine. He had won a really nice allowance race there with a six-figure purse. And he did it with a career best 115 TimeformUS speed figure. And what I actually liked that day is he was able to come from off the pace for the first time in his career. So he showed he had some versatility. And he went right back to his front running ways with this win and got a really nice 120 Timeform US speed figure. I think he's the real deal. I mean, granted, this is not a grade 1 type figure, but it looked like a good effort. A 6-year-old turf horse coming into his own is certainly not a big surprise, and he was helped by a complete non-effort from a couple of the favorites, especially Frostmore, and I'm not sure what happened to him. He didn't break the greatest, but he had no running whatsoever, and he was did no running really whatsoever. He was the horse that came in with the best figures. Seismic Wave was the horse who came in favored for Chad Brown for some reason. I was a little baffled by that one, as he had never run particularly fast in his career. So good effort from Gray's Fable, and even though it was wire to wire, I don't think there was anything fluky about it at all.
Yeah, I think Frostmore not showing up with much of an effort here did benefit Gray's Fable because he was the clear other speed in the race, and once he just broke a little bit flat-footed and didn't want to get engaged early, that basically handed Gray's Fable a pretty comfortable lead in here. It's not like he was walking up front, he was setting an honest pace, but it did appear like that Gulfstream Park turf course, which you can see in the TimeformUS charts, has a track condition rating of 10. That's as fast as it gets, and typically when you get a really firm, hard turf course like that, you can get a horse that sets legitimate fracks and just keeps going on the front end, and that's what we saw from Gray's Fable, because it wasn't just the winner, it was basically a merry-go-round race in behind this horse. I mean, those who were chasing him early finished second and third here and fourth, so just not a lot of running from the back of the pack, so maybe you give the closers some of an excuse in this race, but I thought the winner ran well enough, and we'll see if he can replicate this performance against Graded Stakes Company in the future for Roger Attfield. It was a good day for the 6-year-olds at Gulfstream Park, as we saw 6-year-old winners in the Ghost Zapper, the Appleton, Eye of the Jedi, and Gray's Fable, and another 6-year-old mare winner in the Sand Springs, as Sweet By and By took that race in her second start for Safi Joseph since the trainer switch. She was second to Zofel last time when they met over the same distance at Gulfstream Park, was just second best to that horse that day, but she was facing an easier field here, and we saw the good Sweet By and By show up.
Yeah, it was a nice effort from her. She got a 119 TimeformUS speed figure for the win, which I think matched her career best. I do think part of that was the drop out of graded stakes competition in the just this listed stakes, but she did it easy enough. She beat a really solid horse and Feel Glorious, kind of got the jump on that one. And, she's probably more a grade 2, grade 3 type, but I imagine she's going to get the chance to move back into that company going forward.
Yeah, Sweet By and By beat Feel Glorious by 2.5 lengths here. I don't think that the gap between those two is really that large. Feel Glorious is just the kind of horse that is never going to be that well served by a really hard turf course at Gulfstream. She comes from off the pace. So Sweet By and By got the jump on her here and was dominant. But both of these horses seems like ones that could be competitive in some grade 2 and grade 3 events later in the year in New York. We'll see what they decide to do with Sweet By and By. She's currently trained by Safi Joseph, but I know her owner, Joe Mbisi, will move her around to different trainers depending on which circuit she's competing at. I know she was with Tony Dutcher in New York last year, so we'll see what they decide to do with her. But this was a good effort from her, and it's always nice to see these older horses still firing top efforts at the age of 6. Away from the stakes racing, just to talk about a few Allowance and Maiden races before we move on to some other venues. On Saturday at Gulfstream Park, Psyoff won an Allowance race going the same mile distance that we saw Gray's Fable win over in the Appleton, and actually ran a faster race than that horse with the same kind of running style, taking it to the rest of the field, going to the front end, and this horse has really achieved some things for Todd Pletcher that he wasn't able to when previously in the Chad Brown barn. Seems like he's got a little more staying power, and he's running some higher speed figures.
Yeah, no, this was definitely a fast race. Gulfstream can get confusing at times with all the different rails and run-ups, but in this case, all the mile races, or at least 4 of them, were all run on the exact same conditions, including this one in the Appleton, and Psyoff just ran a really fast race. He got a 123 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. It sure would have been interesting to see what he could have done in a race like the Appleton. He's certainly been in stakes company before, and he's always a pace factor in those races, but he looks like he's ready to jump right back in with the big boys, because this was certainly fast, and he's always going to be a presence, even if he's not around at the end.
Now, Bill Mott had a good day on Saturday. He had a few winners, including Warlike Goddess, as well as the winner of the Cutler Bay Annex, who is a 3-year-old who's undefeated in 3 career starts. We're not going to talk about that race because the speed figure just came back a little bit low. Though another 3-year-old that he sent out to win on the turf on Saturday was the winner of the first race, Colton's Command. And this race got a figure from us that was very similar to what Annex got in the stakes race later. But I want to point out this performance because if you didn't see the first race of the day, this horse was very visually impressive, and I don't even care so much about the speed figure when you get a first-time starter that is as dominant as this horse was. This looks like one with stakes potential.
Well, I'm going to let you go and take it. I'll just say he ran a 94 speed figure because I admittedly have not seen this race. I was wondering why you picked it, so I will let you expand on your thoughts. I assume that it has to do with the trip, and I will certainly watch the replay after the show.
Yeah, I mean, this horse, he didn't get a bad trip by any means. He actually got a very good trip for a horse that's coming from off the pace. But the late kick that he displayed in this race is something that you just don't often see at Gulfstream. I mean, he advanced coming around the far turn into a good position. And once Junior Alvarado swung him to the outside to come around horses into the lane, he just kicked clear from this field with ease and opened up 4 lengths on the field in just the final eighth of a mile. It doesn't look like there's too much substance to him from a physical standpoint. It looks like a very light-bodied horse, but he's got a really nice stride on him, just a very efficient mover. And the son of Twirl and Candy just seems like one that has a really powerful closing kick. So I'll be interested to see what he can do against a better field in the future because, I mean, no argument with the speed figure. He wasn't facing the best field of maidens here. I just think this is a horse that, based on the performance and the closing kick that he put in, showed some real ability.
I will say, based on looking at the worksheet as you were talking, this is one of the mile races that was not run under the same conditions as the other 4. It was one run on the 0 rail setting, not a lot of run-up. So it's a race you might want to consider. It very well could be faster. For some reason, I didn't give it that F notation or O for only, but I'm probably going to go back and add that in now that given what I'm looking at here, because there wasn't a whole lot to go on that 0 rail turf course. A couple of the races were around 3 turns. The 2 that were around 2 turns were both for maidens, one for 3-year-olds, one for 3-year-old fillies. So it is possible he ran faster than the 94.
As we wrap up the Gulfstream action before we advance to some other venues, just one more race to talk about. This one from Sunday's card. It was an allowance race going 7 furlongs, and Fat Man, a likable horse down at Gulfstream, got back on track here after a couple of disappointing performance and stakes races over the winter. Just didn't seem to recapture his best form once he returned from a layoff last year for Kent Sweezy. But based on this performance, he's rounding back into his best condition.
Yeah, this was a big effort from him. I don't have the official speed figure. I usually do Gulfstream, but in this case for Sunday, my assistant's doing it. But looking at the worksheet, I would guess it's going to be in the low 120s, maybe 120, 121 type figure. So a really good number for him. And what I found interesting was he did it on the turn back to 7 furlongs. I don't think he's run that short in quite some time, maybe since his career debut, which was on turf. So maybe they found something with him with going this shorter distance.
Moving on to that final Kentucky Derby prep that we saw this past weekend, all of these offering 100 qualifying points to the winner, and that was the Grade 3 Jeff Ruby Stakes at Turfway Park over the Tapeta surface. And like the King got the job done for Wesley Ward, we had a few horses coming out of that John Battaglia Memorial, but he was the one that decided to step forward in this race, and the others regressed a little bit. And Craig, another great selection by you. I know you liked this horse in the forecast last week, and I think you could say, though, he got the trip in a race where maybe some others didn't.
Yeah, for sure. I wouldn't even swear he was the best horse in the race. That might have very well been the runner-up Sainthood for Todd Pletcher. But as I mentioned on the forecast, the more I looked at the PPs, I was almost positive he was going to get a really great trip in here. And that's what happened. He did experience a pretty good bump at the top of the lane. For some reason, there was an inquiry against him. And I got to admit, I was getting a little nervous because they showed it about 700 times on the feed. And I was like, what are they looking at? Because actually, he got fouled. I will say the runner-up had a tough trip for sure, but it wasn't because of the one. So good effort from him. I don't know what it means as far as the Derby going forward. He got a solid 110 TimeformUS speed figure, so really good for synthetics, but he's not a horse I would consider a Derby contender personally.
Yeah, I mean, this race will probably produce a couple starters for the Kentucky Derby. To me, I would just dismiss both of them. Like the King has only shown ability on synthetic so far. He does have a pedigree that I guess says he's a little bit versatile, being by Palace Malice. But I'm not anticipating that he's going to take a big step forward on the dirt. And Sainthood, the runner-up, at least he's handled the dirt in the past, although he's run a little bit slower on it. He did run well here, and I think you can make the argument that he was the best horse because he was contesting that pace early, and they were going pretty quickly up front, and you saw how some other horses who were up close to the lead completely fell apart at the end of this race, and some basically eased towards the final furlongs. Sainthood kept battling on, and even after getting into that pocket at the top of the stretch and having to get sawed off just a little bit. I think that was more due to the fourth place finisher Har Rai guy drifting out a little bit. As you said, the winner didn't seem to really be the aggressor there. So Sainthood ran well to be second here, all things considered. I'm just not really viewing these horses as legitimate contenders moving forward to the Kentucky Derby. One other race to discuss from Turfway Park last weekend, that was the Kentucky Cup Classic, going the same distance as the Jeff Ruby Stakes, 1.125 miles. And a bit of an upset here as Visitant was able to get the job done over the heavy favorite Set Piece, who had been a terror on the synthetic surfaces up until now. But Visitant, kind of like the King and the Jeff Ruby Stakes, was able to make a wide move coming off the far turn, got the jump on the favorite, and held on.
Yeah, and I think you described it perfectly. It was a race that we had most of the fractions coded in blue. It was pretty slow pace for sure. And Visitant just got a great ride from Deshaun Parker. He took the clear path on the outside, the favorite Set Piece. Was kind of bottled up inside, and he ran fine. He just couldn't get going for a while, and by the time he did, it was too late. Visitant was gone. He had plenty left, and there was no catching him. So good effort from those two. I'm not going to get too down on Set Piece. I thought it was just a matter of him being hemmed in, and if you switched the trips, I think he would have won. But again, hats off to Deshaun Parker. He rode this horse perfectly and got his horse home at a nice price.
Yeah, this was a much slower pace than what we saw on the Jeff Ruby Stakes, and the final time was faster. But I know we didn't give the Jeff Ruby Stakes a big pace bonus because, I just guess you don't do that too much on synthetic surfaces, and especially going 1.125 miles distance. I know that those red color-coded fractions, the impact is somewhat mitigated on the speed figure, so it's not a big surprise to me to see this race come back a little faster than the Jeff Ruby Stakes. And in the grand scheme of things, in the 3-year-old and older horse divisions, these horses are just a little bit slow and not really grade 1 caliber.
Yeah, for sure. And you're right about the upgrades on synthetics. We don't give bigger upgrades like we do on dirt because, frankly, running super fast early on synthetics is not the way to win for the most part.
Let's move on to our final venue on this podcast. That's Santa Anita out west. We've got a couple stakes races there from past weekend. We're also going to mention some Allowance and Maiden races. The two stakes races that we'll focus on are the Santana Mile and the Santa Ana. The Santana Mile was a dirt race going a mile that was run on Sunday. That was won by the Bob Baffert runner Axeman, who's been pretty up and down in his form over the past few years, has some layoffs sprinkled into his PPs, but coming back off another layoff here, it seems like Bob Baffert got him back on track. Against this field, at least, he was able to get the job done.
Yeah, I mean, Axeman, he's hard to knock. He wins plenty of races. He does throw in some duds. He seems like kind of an all-or-nothing horse, but he ran just fine. When he's able to make the lead and get clear, he usually proves pretty tough, and he did so on Sunday. I don't have the official speed figure for this race, and I don't think it's a particularly easy one to make. There were only a couple route races. So I'll bring up the other one, which we're going to talk about as well, and that was another Bob Baffert horse, Magic on Tap, won an allowance race. Just a couple races earlier, I think it was at 1 mile and a 16th. They were the only two routes on the card, but there were some sprints. My guess is that Axeman's going to get about a 117 speed figure, and Magic on Tap will get about a 110. I say my guess because based on the raw times, Magic on Tap actually ran a faster race. But when I looked at the worksheet, and again, I'm not sure what my assistant's going to do, but I do have a pretty good idea that he's going to break the race out because based on the sprints earlier and after, it does look like the track got significantly slower for the last couple races, to my eye. Normally, I don't even check things like this, but since we were going to talk about it for the show, I looked up the buyer speed figure just to see what his team had done here, and they have Axeman getting a 95 compared to Magic on Tap getting a 91. So my guess is that they also kind of had a variance split between somewhere in the middle of the card. I imagine that's the way it's going to go. I'll tweet out when the official figures come in later today, but in any case, I thought both these horses ran fine. Particularly impressive was Magic on Tap, who was coming off a really long layoff. I think if memory serves, it was over 500 plus days. So Bob Baffert, he obviously is one of, if not the top trainer in the game, particularly for dirt horses. He gets a lot of grief sometimes, but anybody can bring a horse like this back off that kind of layoff to run well is a very good horseman.
Yeah, this was actually the first stakes victory by Axeman since he won the Sir Barton on Preakness Day all the way back in 2018. He had won a few optional claiming races since then, but he really hadn't won a stakes all the way back since that 2018 card. And I know back then some people were talking about him like he might be a threat to Justify later in the year, who was also in Bob Baffert's barn at the time. Things didn't quite work out that way, but it's nice to see Axeman get back to the winner's circle at the age of 6. And as for Magic on Tap, that other Bob Baffert horse, I mean, he is very lightly raced for a 5-year-old. He's only made 4 career starts, and he's one of those horses back in 2018 who was among that list of Bob Baffert first-time starters that won at Del Mar as 2-year-olds. I think he won with something like 15 first-time starters that summer, and Magic on Tap was one of them. He hasn't raced that much since that debut effort, and he was coming off a year-and-a-half layoff here, but this was a nice effort from him. He's going to have to face some tougher company in the future if he's meeting stakes horses, but I liked the poise that he showed coming around the far turn, waiting inside of horses, coming up the rail when he finally made his move, finished up like he could go even farther than a mile and a 16th. So I think this horse has a lot of ability. It's just a matter of keeping him sound because we've barely seen him at all in 3 years.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see when he shows up again. I mean, if he shows up again a month in the from now in the entries, I think that's a really good sign. You brought up his maiden race. He actually beat some really good horses that day in Gray Magician, who was in second, and Extra Hope in third. Both of those have won stakes races for sure. I think multiple stakes. So strong effort. He has some talent. And it's funny, I mentioned the speed figures. If for some reason him and Axeman were to meet up soon at like a mile and a 16th distance, I would almost prefer this one because I think he has somewhere to go to improve to, where at this point we know what Axeman is for the most part. He's a router who needs to get clear. Hopefully they won't be turning him back to sprints anymore because I think we see what he's best at, and that's these shorter 2-turn route races. But yeah, I was impressed with Magic on Tap, so look forward to seeing him show up. Hopefully he's able to keep him sound and we see him in the entries soon.
After talking about those Sunday races as a pair, I think we can also do the same with the 2 races we're going to discuss from Saturday at Santa Anita, as both the Grade 3 Santa Ana and an allowance race earlier on the card were run over the same 1.25 mile distance. Now, the allowance race that was won by award winner went much faster than the Santa Ana, but pace had a lot to do with that, as going to Vegas, the winner of the Santa Ana was just allowed to walk along on a very pedestrian pace and basically turn it into a 1/4 mile sprint to the wire, as Mucho Unusual, the heavy favorite in that spot, really never had a chance to catch her.
Yeah, this was a race, got a huge pace upgrade from us. Going to Vegas gets a 119 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. Mucho Unusual runs her lowest figure in a while, a 113. And as you said, she really had very little chance. I'm not sure what the other riders were thinking in here, letting her go. It's a Richard Baltish trainee. You knew she was going to be dangerous, but once they turned for home, the race was over. I mean, there was absolutely no way they were going to catch her. The rest of the field, I mean, they didn't look like a whole lot coming in. I mean, Red Lark, who finished third, she's just okay. But the top 2 were fine. They're probably grade 2, grade 3 types. But I think this is about the max we're going to get from them, around the high teens type speed figures.
Yeah, I know that Mucho Unusual had run a series of graded stakes races last fall at Santa Anita, Del Mar, but I think she might have been a little bit overrated coming into this based on those efforts, just not really meeting the best competition in California, and she turned out to be vulnerable to an unfavorable pace scenario here. So not a big surprise that she lost, but interested to see how this race compares to the other 1.25 mile race on the card, which was won by award winner who ran, I think, about like a 1.5 seconds faster than the Santa Ana, but obviously the pace of that allowance allowance race won by award winner, was much faster, as he also set the pace every step of the way, but laid down some more legitimate fractions.
Yeah, that was obviously a much quicker pace. He only got a 1:17 Timeform US speed figure for the race. But we've talked about this many times on the Pacecast. With these turf races, particularly when you get to these longer distances, when you get to 10, 11, 12 furlongs, the pace is oftentimes more important than the final time. And it's all about how fast they finish. So it was a strong effort in the allowance race from award winner. Not going to take anything away from him, but a 1:17 type speed figure is not going to win a lot of stakes races, even in California. Maybe a listed type, but that would be about his limit, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a good effort for him, considering that 1.25 miles is the farthest distance that he ever tried. And I mean, I guess you could say that this race is not that dissimilar to the allowance race that Churn and Burn ran before he went on to win the Pan American. I'm not saying that award winner has that kind of graded stakes victory in his future, but speed is always dangerous in those longer marathon races. So if they want to stretch him out a little bit further, potentially that's where he could really excel. He certainly has the pedigree to be that kind of horse because he's a half brother to Oscar Performance, that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf winner from a few seasons ago. So he could have the quality if he's found his niche going a little bit longer. But I don't disagree with the decision that you guys made about the speed figure, because pace does have such a great impact on the final times in these longer races.
Yeah, I will say it was good to see. I mean, he's a good horse, and David Hoffman's has him. He's a name we don't see very often anymore, but if I remember right, he trained Touch Gold, who won the Belmont Stakes several years ago. I don't want to date myself too much, but it's been a while. I remember I was there that day as a much younger person, but I hadn't heard his name very much at all, so good to see he has a good horse in the barn.
We'll wrap things up on this podcast and at Santa Anita from last week with a couple of maiden races from Friday. I think the one that got the most people talking was the dirt race later in the card, which was won by Bezos. This was a dirt route going a mile, and Bezos was that highly touted Bob Baffert runner who I know was included in the Kentucky Derby future wager a few weeks ago. Some people even bet him in that pool down to, I think, odds of something like 26-1. That seems a little bit silly now because obviously he was a huge disappointment when he made his debut. And even breaking his maiden here, I know that I wasn't blown away. I mean, he beat a couple horses that are, I guess, okay, but it wasn't the most visually impressive performance, at least for my money.
No, for sure. He was coming out of a really strong allowance race. We saw Dream Shake come back to win, or come back to run a really good third in a stakes race next time out, and it was a really fast rated race. But to your point, he got a 1:03 Timeform US speed figure running 7th that day. He got a 1:02 for the win here. So a lot of it's about the competition. It wasn't the strongest. I mean, it's not a terrible effort. There's nothing wrong with a 1:02 for a 3-year-old if he progresses. Maybe he could turn into some kind of stakes horse, but at this point, that would be really tough to project. I just think he caught an easy field. I'll be interested to see where he shows up next. I'll certainly be watching.
Yeah, I mean, I'm being a little bit hard on this horse because I just never really understood where that hype was coming from. I mean, like everybody else, I had watched those workouts prior to his debut, and I just never got it. He didn't look that impressive to me, and I know he had shown some speed in the morning, but I couldn't fathom why he was getting the kind of accolades that other Bob Baffert firsters have gotten that have actually turned out to be champions. So just not a big surprise that he's running these kinds of speed figures when he's actually gotten onto the track in the afternoon. And frankly, if there was a maiden winner on Friday that I was more impressed with, it would be the winner of the first race of the day. I know it was on a different surface going 6.5 furlongs on the turf, but for Peter Urton, Cherubic Factor, who was getting on turf for the first time after just making one prior start on the dirt, this horse was pretty impressive. He got a good trip stalking the pace, but he really kicked for home impressively in the lane.
Yeah, this was a big effort. He got a 1:09 Timeform US speed figure for the win. He had done absolutely no running whatsoever. He didn't get a great start in this race, which makes that 1:09 look even a little bit better. It was only a 4-horse field, and it was pretty contested early. He did sit off of a couple dueling leaders, so he did get a perfect trip, but I never want to underestimate a horse too much that actually runs a fast race, and he didn't here. So good effort from him. Curious if he'll stretch out next time or if maybe they think he's a sprinter, but he looked like one who could probably go further, at least up to a mile to me.
Yeah, and if you look at his pedigree, I think that makes sense. He's by the Factor, who's among the most versatile sires out there. He can get horses that run on basically any surface and over really any distance, from sprinting on turf going even out to longer distances on the grass. And this horse looks like a son of the Factor because if you watch his stride when he comes into the stretch, he just has that elongated turf stride that you see a lot of the progeny of the Factor display. I mean, he was just really reaching once they turned him loose coming into the stretch as he kicked for home. So I think this horse has some ability and a nice pedigree on him. His dam's actually a 3/4 sister to a runner named Brave Tin Soldier, who was a nice turf horse from, I think, maybe 10 years ago, who could win going sprinting on the turf, even out to some route distances. And deeper in the female family, he's actually related to Fusaiuchi Pegasus. So there's some pedigree for this horse to go a little bit longer. So very interested to see where he goes in the future.
I was going to say, that's why I keep you around, because you said if I look at the pedigree, and I can tell you I'm not looking at any pedigrees. I wait for you to tell me. So but call me lazy, but that's what I'm. Yeah, sometimes it's just being efficient. I know where I'm going to get the good info from, so why do it myself if somebody else will do it for me?
Yeah, when I'm like 10 minutes late to our calls to record these, it's usually me last minute looking up some pedigree, so I have those nuggets to bring forth. But yeah, I just always enjoy that and seeing who these horses are related to. It brings it back down memory lane as well sometimes when you see who's in these horses' pedigrees. So maybe it doesn't mean much for this horse, but regardless of all that, as for the performance on Saturday, I thought he showed some ability. And speaking of Fusaiuchi Pegasus, who I mentioned as being related to this horse, that's a bit of a segue into what we'll talk about next weekend because he was one of the more impressive winners of the Wood Memorial the past few years. And speaking of the Wood, we've got an impressive array of races coming up for this upcoming TimeformUS forecast on Friday when we record that. We'll handicap the Saturday races, and I assume we'll talk about all three of those Derby preps: the Santa Anita Derby, the Wood Memorial at Aqueduct, and the Bluegrass at Keeneland. All of those fields look like they're coming up pretty competitive and strong. A lot to be sorted out in those races. So much to look forward to on the TimeformUS forecast when we record that on Friday.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. I saw the Bluegrass field was always out earlier. Essential Qualities in there. He'll probably be a heavy favorite, but I haven't seen the others. But I'm sure they're going to be full of horses looking to get that last crack at getting the Derby points needed to get in the gate. So always competitive races for the most part, and always fun to handicap.
I appreciate everybody tuning in this week. Remember that you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening, and make sure to stay tuned for that TimeformUS forecast on Friday.